Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the Standardisation webinar for Hair and Beauty Studies Technical Award for Key Stage 4. My name is Alison Atkinson and I'm the Principal Moderator for this qualification. I'd like to say that we may have a few delegates who are teaching the Level 2 Post-16 hairdressing qualification, but please stay on the line as I'm sure this webinar will be of use to you. We go through a lot of processes which will be relevant, and although you'll see that we refer to pre-16 material, you will easily be able to relate this to your qualification. Can I just say that if you do experience any technical difficulties during a webinar, or if you have any particular questions you'd like answering immediately, the Technicals Moderation Support Team will be happy to help you. Their number is 01924 206 719. Just to clarify, all participants are in listen-only mode whilst we take you through a set of slides. There will be an opportunity to have your questions answered at the end of the presentation, so please take a note of these as we go through. At any time, you can type your questions into the question box on the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, but if you want to concentrate on the slides, you'll be given some time at the end to type in those questions. So, as an extension of the generic standardisation webinar, City and Guilds have produced subject-specific ones, where we carry out standardisation on some learner work from last year's synoptic assignment. You were sent this work along with the associated paperwork and asked to carry out a marking activity. Hopefully you've done this so that we can start to go through the thoughts and justifications of the marking by myself, the Principal Moderator. So if we look at the objectives for today, we're going to explain the justifications of marks by the Principal Moderator for last year's synoptic assignment and highlight good practice in the use of City and Guilds documents. Also to facilitate a standardisation activity and to remind you of typical activities recommended for internal standardisation. And obviously, as I said, lastly, there will be an opportunity to answer your questions. So first off, we will have a look at the example of the student response, and we'll go just here. So you were sent this document, and in section 1 you will see that there is the task brief. Now, if you haven't got access to this document, you will have after this webinar, because we'll be sending you all the documents, including the slide deck that we're going through today. So, as it states here, the assignment brief, which is actually different to the tasks that you can see down below here. The brief is issued to candidates 4 weeks before the assessment window opens. It sets the context for the tasks which follow, and in this case gives a theme of the 1960s. So if we can see here, the candidates are put into a scenario which states they're working on Saturdays in a local hair and beauty salon, and the town that is situated has a festival every year. The festival has a 1960s theme, so it's starting to kind of put them into this sort of context where they will then be producing evidence for their tasks. So further down into the document here, we can see that task 1, they're asked to produce some presentation slides. They are asked to include some speaker notes, because then they'll be giving in hopefully more detail and depth to their answers. And they're asked to produce those slides on facts and comparisons of hair and beauty looks in the 60s and today, comparisons between hair and beauty products and their ingredients, and technological advancements seen in today's hair and beauty sector. Task 2 is their practical task. They are asked to produce a hair and beauty 1960s themed look. This will allow them to demonstrate their hair and beauty technical skills, and to complement their look they must produce a report which includes this information down here. And then we move on to task 3, which they are asked to use the image that they produced in task 2 to produce some packaging with the 1960s theme for some retail product. It's up to them what product they use. They're not expected to actually make the product themselves, but just to create the designs for use on the packaging. So that's the task. If we go through the pages of this document, we will see that we have got the marking grid here. We're going to look in depth at the marking grid later on in this presentation, so I'll whiz through this at the moment. We move on here to the candidate's work. So on page 11, we can see when scrolling through this work that the candidate has got a title page and then a contents page. She's got her evidence for task 1, which includes facts and comparisons of beauty, first of all, and then facts and comparisons of hair. She's also got some iconic people that she's looked at and as a comparison between the 1960s and the present day. She's got comparisons between hair products in the 60s and then today, and then also some technological advancements. Okay, so she's got quite a bit of detail in there. She's certainly covered both hair and beauty. She's got a bibliography that finishes off that task, which shows that that she's done a bit of research and that we can check that that research hasn't been used, the wording from that research hasn't been used too much, that she's actually summarised that wording herself. So we've got here a document, if we can make that a little bit smaller, task 2, which is the inspiration for her practical assignment. We've got the hairstyle that she wants to produce there, and then the makeup look that she wants to produce as well. We've also here got a consultation document which has been created by the candidate, shows that she's doing a hair and beauty treatment but she's not doing nails, and she's got a bit about the factors that she's considered before carrying out the performance. She has got, she's filled in quite a bit of detail in the products that she's using, the functions of those products and ingredients within those products. And then over the page, she's got an explanation of the tools and equipment that she's used, and also the techniques. A little bit of health and safety there with the PPE that she's used. And then finally, she's got some before and after images that she has given. So you can see here we've got the before photo of the hair, 2 after photos, and then an after photo of the makeup as well. So for this task, those photographs are perfectly sufficient. I would say that if anything, any criticism could be made of those photographs is that the background is a little bit busy. Perhaps she could have been standing up against a white background, like these white walls just here would have perhaps been a little bit better for us to see the detail of that work. And certainly if you're listening in with any other hair or beauty qualifications in mind, then you should keep that in mind in terms of the level of detail that's needed for that specific synoptic assignment, because you know, people standing in the background or lots of equipment in the background may well hamper the quality of that particular end result. Okay, so the consultation document itself is not actually now issued to candidates by City and Guilds. You'll see in the synoptic pack for this year, the 2018 synoptic, that it's almost like a blank piece of paper with the title on the top, and it's actually because we felt that the issuing consultation sheets was too much like leading candidates, and we found that it's actually more difficult to differentiate between the quality of performance if we're giving them a template to fill in. So so basically we're now to encourage our candidates to create their own consultation forms or reporting forms, as they are in this qualification. As you know, this qualification is a Key Stage 4, meaning that it's a 14 to 16 qualification, and we don't have moderation visits for Key Stage 4 technicals. So it is pretty important that because of that, we need to substantiate this evidence, this practical performance, really, really well. So the candidate obviously should do some sort of evaluation of their performance, and also the teacher. As you can see on this final page to the report, the teacher has done a basic review of the performance, and the candidate has then done an evaluation following on from that. So that's really good practice. If we look then at the planning document, this is for task 3 now. So this is where the candidate has started to make some plans in terms of what she's going to create for her product packaging. And there's her product packaging with the picture of the image that she produced in task 2, and statement on the purpose, how she planned her resources, and then considering the target audience and customer expectations, and then the evaluation, suggestions on how she might improve, and then feedback opportunities. So all of those things were asked for in the tasks. So she's responded really well, I would say, to this assignment. If we now move on to things that the centre has to produce or to upload, then this is the first document. This is a mandatory document. It's the Declaration of Authenticity, and along with other documents, it's new for this year because, as you will see, those of you that compare it to last year, if you were delivering last year, we didn't have this bit at the bottom. So you'll see there's a box here which gives the opportunity to state whether the candidate has received any additional support. We've had a few questions on additional support in previous webinars, and I will just say it's a good idea to have a look at the guidance on page 14 of the synoptic assessment pack for this qualification. It'll be on a different page number, I'm sure, in other synoptic packs, but there is always lots of information in terms of centre guidance on giving additional support to candidates. So have a good look at those that guidance that's available to you. Over the page, we can see that, again, this is something that the centres are responsible for generating, and this is the practical observation form. It's a critical piece of evidence that the centre observer produces through and during the practical performance. If this is completed well, it will bring the performance to life. As you know, the moderator will not be present during the practical, so it's important that this document is as descriptive as possible. Observers should describe how well the candidate performed against each assessment objective, remembering, of course, that it's not just AO3, which is the practical, that we're concentrating on, and that candidates can show their knowledge, understanding, and other assessment objectives throughout a practical performance. The band descriptors should be used as a guide on the marking grid, band descriptors on the marking grid, when making comments, but should not be copied word for word. By using these band descriptors and some of the comments with them in them, it helps the marker and the moderator to allocate suitable marks. And as it says here, on the notes, detailed, accurate and differentiating notes which identify strengths and weaknesses are necessary to distinguish between different quality of performances and to facilitate accurate allocation of marks once all evidence has been submitted. That little final bit there, once all evidence has been submitted, is a key part to consider when carrying out, when observing candidates doing practical, because remember that is the practical performance is actually only one of the 3 tasks. So we don't actually allocate marks at this point. As you can see, when we scroll through this document, all we're doing is judging the performance of the candidate in the sense of these assessment objectives. And as you can see, we go on to the 4th and 5th AO as we go through that form. So that's an important point to consider. As you can see, this form has been word processed. You can download the documents from the City and Guilds website, and they will be in Word format, so you can actually complete them electronically. And I would say that that's probably a little bit easier for you, because then you can save them as electronic versions and then upload them onto the moderation portal when you're ready. If you do want to complete them in handwriting, then just ensure that that handwriting is legible, particularly when the document has been scanned. We found last year that there were a few documents that perhaps had been completed in pen or in a different coloured pen that made it actually difficult to decipher once that document had been uploaded. Okay, if we move on to the candidate record form, or the CRF. Okay, so we have got, again, this document is a key piece of evidence, and it's a mandatory document that all centres should be using for the technicals. It's accessible on the website, and you'll see that both in the technicals centre documents library and also in the assessment pages of the specific qualification, you will see these documents are made available to you. Again, they can be word processed. They are Word documents that you can add your wording into, or you can download them and do them by hand, as I say, with that caveat of it being legible once you've done that. Care should be taken to ensure that the marks along the top of each AO, if you are using these for different qualifications, that you do check the marks along the top for each of these AOs, because it's likely that if you're using this for a different qualification, not the 3038 Hair and Beauty Key Stage 4 qual, that 15% of the marks that are available in terms of weighting in this assessment objective may not be right. There may be more or there may be less marks available for assessment objective 1, and that goes throughout the whole. So please make sure that if you are using these documents, you get them from the correct part of the assessment pages for your qualification. That's an important one. So as we see here, we'll look at some of the comments, and we'll match those up to the marking grid in a moment. But I just wanted to draw your attention to the way that this document has been changed for this year. As you can see across the top, it's got all of the marks that are available in that assessment objective. So for recall, we've got anything up to 9. We've also got these shaded areas which show in the marking grid the bands 1, 2 and 3, just to kind of help you to place your marks without having to keep flicking through the marking grid, because that tends to be quite a lengthy document. So we've given you a bit of a helping hand there. The other thing to say with this document is that obviously when you've assigned your marks here, here and here, that you make sure that you total them up here. And make sure that you do that maths correctly, because we did see last year there were a few clerical errors with centres not quite adding this up correctly, which is an important thing to do, because once those marks have been submitted onto the portal, those are the marks that the moderator will be looking at. Okay, so if we go back then to the slide deck, and we're going to have a look at the justifications of the marking seen on the CRF. So we've got down here, that's a copy of the CRF that we've just looked at, the candidate record form, and we're going to compare that to the specific assessment objective here as well. So as we can see, the assessment grid, or the marking grid, they all look very similar. They're different colours for different specific things. And so, for example, all these blue cells here are all the generic aspects of the marking grid, which don't change throughout any of the qualifications, whereas these green bits do. So obviously if you picked up a an assessment grid for a different qualification, you might see different aspects that are written within this bit here. So as you can see here, we've got the weighting of the assessment objective. In this case, for recall, it's 15%, which gives us anything up to 9 marks out of 60. We've got some generic sort of questions that you might want to ask yourself in terms of focusing your mind about what recall is. And then across the top, we've got these band descriptors. So again, we're starting to just kind of think about where the evidence lies in terms of its quality when we're looking at these band descriptors across the top. So we can see here the poor to limited band descriptor 1 will achieve anything between 0 and 3 marks. The fair to good band descriptor 2 is 4 to 6 marks. And then the strong to excellent band 3 is 7 to 9 marks. And it gives some justifications for those as well there. Those justifications are more subject specific as we go further down into these green bits, as I said. So taking a look at the candidate's work that we've just very quickly gone through, we can see that the evidence was given in assessment objective 1, so recall, given a mark of 7 because strong, confident and a consistent depth and knowledge was shown across the 3 tasks. So looking at the set of 3 tasks holistically, we can see that the candidate has shown pretty strong knowledge that pops her into that band 3 descriptor up there. The research was sensibly adapted and replicated in the practical assessment, and strong working practices were evident within health and safety, and this was done with complete autonomy. So you can see that this candidate has got a decent amount of knowledge when carrying out her 3 tasks. So if we look at assessment objective number 2, which is understanding, this has been allocated 12 out of a possible 15 marks. If we look at the slides on pages 14 to 18, and I'll give you some time to look at those later on, but we see strong evidence of their understanding with coherent explanations. A good range of the taught content was displayed here, which is a good indicator when making these judgments. It's a good idea to go back to the qualification handbook to remind yourself of what was taught. Okay, so as it states here, methodical planning with thoughts explored and carried out. Comparisons between the 2 industries were constructive, and with a little more depth or detail across the 3 tasks, the mark could have been raised. So just as a note here, it's a good idea sometimes to make note to the next person that picks this document up, i.e. possibly the moderator, where you might have raised marks or why you haven't allocated full marks. So it's almost showing the moderator reasons why you've actually assigned it a particular mark. So as it says here, you know, that with a little more depth or detail across all 3 tasks, because it was felt to be lacking in all 3 of those in terms of her understanding, then we perhaps could have raised it from a 12 up to a 13 to 15 marking. Okay. So also when looking at the candidate evidence in the practical observation form, we can look at this practical technical skills, and we can see that as the PM, myself, has taken the time to look at that, we can see that I've allocated that work 7 marks, 7 out of a possible 12. Now that is because there were some sort of some errors in the hand-eye coordination, particularly in the application of makeup, and that came about by looking at the photographs, but also looking at the feedback from the tutor and also the practical observation form, the content of that judgment there. So she's shown fairly adept skills in hair, less so in beauty, and also she's got no evidence of any work done on nails. But we must remember that this isn't a license to practice qualification, and marks can't be removed for commercial timings or other aspects which may be considered professional or industry standards. If we remember that the guided learning hours are only 120, this should help you to pitch your level of expectation of their practical skills. Looking at the weighting, which is 20% up here, in this case, it will also guide you as to the importance of the practical skills, which compared to job-ready qualifications is actually quite low. So if we look at what was said about the practical, the learner demonstrated confidence and dexterity in carrying out the hair and makeup designs, fair to good hand-eye coordination, and a capable attitude towards the practical tasks. More practice with makeup would have achieved a more polished look, but overall a good finish. So I think you'll agree with those marks being in the middle of that band descriptor 2, fair to good. She's got 8 marks. So we've got sort of generally successful application of skills, although some areas of complexity may present a challenge. So I think you'll agree with that, that as a judgment. So if we look on to assessment objective number 4, which is bringing it all together, this has been awarded 12 out of 15 marks. This candidate researched well and brought this into her practical activity and also her other the 2 tasks. Each task was relevant, but further marks could have been awarded if they had more clearly linked the era to the practical in their write-up. To gain full marks, high-level thinking and analysis should be evidence as seen on the band descriptor. So you can see here we've got some high-level thinking, analysis, application of work, research from a broad range of sources applied with consistent relevance to the task. So as it was stated on the CRF, strong evidence of detail and accuracy, particularly in task 1. Practical and theory linked together in an informative manner with compliance shown to the assignment brief. Good evidence of research from a range of sources consistently relevant to the tasks. So as you can see, these are the reasons why I have given her 12 marks. Sometimes I'll give reasons, and this is the same as what you should be doing in your centres. Sometimes you'll give reasons as to why you have given certain things, and other times it might be just as relevant to say why you haven't given a mark. Okay. So just as a note, we have actually had some questions regarding grade boundaries and using these when assigning marks. This is not considered best practice because, as you know, the grade boundaries are subject to annual change. Concentrate on assigning marks accurately and making sure that evidence supports this. Another important point to make here is that the bands on the marking grid seen here do not relate to pass, merit and distinction. They are merely there to help you make your own initial judgments prior to the fine-tuned marking of the whole synoptic assignment. So by reading some of these, you should not be trying to place them in pass, merit and distinction because it is unlikely that that will actually happen in the end. Okay. So finally, on to the last assessment objective, and those of you that delivered last year will know that there were in fact 8 AOs. Well, we've tuned it down to 5 now, so all the detail that was in those other 3 now belongs in these 5. So overall, this candidate has got 7 out of 9 marks. Very good attention to detail was shown. Top marks would have been awarded if presentation had been less of a bullet point style, which lends itself to notes rather than in-depth information. And you can see on those slides that she did tend to do quite a lot of bullet pointing. Her font size was really small because she was trying to get that information in, but it might have been an idea that adding those notes pages to slide decks may have helped her in adding that little bit more depth to her understanding and her kind of the way that she pulled it all together. I think you'll agree that this piece is not exactly faultless, but which is of course a band 3 descriptor, but it's getting on towards being very good. So these descriptors should really help you make your decisions, and if you follow them closely when marking, this should help the moderator to come to the same decision as you. Okay. So we're now on to the questions aspect of the presentation, and we have already got some pre-prepared questions that in previous webinars we've been asked. So I'm just going to go through some of those and give you some answers to some of the questions, but please be assured that all of the questions asked during these webinars are going to be written down and sent to you in a document, so you can get the answers firsthand from both the technical moderation support team, the principal moderator, and anybody else that works for City and Guilds that might be able to help you. Okay, so question number 1 we have here: what about if photos do not do the task justice? So the answer to that is that photos should be checked for clarity prior to their use as evidence, because they are actually as supplementary evidence which substantiates the practical performance. So it's a good idea actually to read the document supplied by City and Guilds, which is requirements for uploading evidence. That will give you some pieces of information about clarity, about the size of the files that you might want to be uploading, and also to check in your specific assessment pack, because it will say about how many pictures, what angles they should be at, and those sorts of things. So a little bit, another question is, our centre has been using a standard assessment plan for practical. Can you further explain a bit about them setting up their own consultations sheet, please? So the answer to that is basically that, as I said earlier on, consultation sheets are only recommended for delivery of the qualification and not for summative assessment. And this is because the centre devised consultation forms often lead the candidate and do not allow for sufficient differentiation between higher and lower level performers. There are some questions on the webinar that actually relate to either theatrical and media makeup or level 3 hairdressing or the post 16 level 2 hairdressing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get the principal moderator for those qualifications to answer these specific questions, and we're going to get those out to you on this document. So so don't worry, those will be answered. So there's a question here about turnaround of marking, and I think what was being asked is how long the marker gets to mark the synoptic. Basically, you should ensure that all marking, internal standardization and collation of evidence into an electronic document has been carried out in sufficient time for the deadline for uploading evidence, which is May the 18th for this year. So it's important that you do that, you know, as far as the candidate submitting their evidence for their tasks. That's entirely up to you when they submit that, but make sure that you have got time to carry out those internal activities such as your marking and your internal standardization. And remember that moderators will be expecting to see that upload for your sample on the 18th of May. Okay, because that's your deadline. And that relates also to this question, which is when will the sample be requested by the moderation team? The sample actually isn't requested exactly. The deadline for upload is May the 18th, but you should follow the guidelines in the technicals marking and moderation guide, because the sample is actually given to you there. It's basically look at your full cohort, and you should be uploading your sample with regards to the rules of the highest, the lowest, and a good range between the highest and the lowest, and looking at the numbers within your cohort will tell you how many pieces of evidence we expect to see on that portal. Okay, so we have got something about if they've had internal assessment. Right, this is about access arrangements in terms of a candidate being assessed as having additional learning needs. What I would do is I would point you towards that access arrangements document, and then if a candidate has applied for access arrangements, proof of this will be highlighted on the CRF, and the document attached to the upload if the candidate is in the sample. Next question, when can the synoptic assessment be released to Level 2 Beauty? I'm going to get the Level 2 Beauty PM to answer that one. There's a few about additional needs, which again I will point you towards that access arrangements and reasonable adjustments document. The link will be in this in the written questions and answers document, but it is actually quite easy to find on the City and Guilds website as well, so have a good look there. Performance tables. There's a question on performance point values, and I would refer you to the performance tables on the City and Guilds website. 14 to 19 qualifications performance tables. It will give you all the information that you need there. Do students need to research nails and do nails in practical to achieve higher marks? I would say that the answer to that is yes, that since nails is a topic in Unit 203, and it's actually topic 2.3, it's expected they show some knowledge and or skills in this area. Although the wording of the assignment mentions hair and beauty, it's generally accepted that hair and beauty is the sector and nails is one of the industries within that. So actually they shouldn't miss it out if nails isn't explicitly asked for. Where can I access this recording? The recording of this webinar will be available on the website in a couple of days, along with the slides and any other documents that you might need. Next questions is, students are struggling to get models for hair. Is it still okay to use blocks for the hair? And the answer for the 3038 Key Stage 4 qualification is yes. It states in the synoptic pack that they're able to use blocks for hair, but they must use live models for makeup and nails. And so I would point you towards page 8 for that information on this year's synoptic pack. Next question, I know you said something about 4 weeks for the window, but was that how long the learners have to complete it? And the answer to that is no, the 4 weeks is the time which they're given the brief so that they can research prior to them being given the tasks. So they do their research. In last year's case, it's about the 1960s. In this year's case, it's about ancient Greece. And then when they're given the tasks, they have a recommended 13 hours to complete the assignment. And again, have a look at page 8 of the synoptic pack for any further guidance on that, because those tasks are broken down into a certain amount of hours for each one. But I think it's important to say how you do that in your centre, allocate those particular hours, is entirely up to you, because some centres only see their candidates for 1 or 2 hours per week, and so obviously you'll be taking more than 4 weeks to get through that 13 hours. So another question, with the ingredients, do students need to mention the 2 main ingredients and explain the function, or add all of the ingredients? And the answer to that is I would just expect that the active or main ingredients are explained. For example, a skin moisturiser will have many ingredients, but it would be just those such as the oils, emollients, or perhaps preservatives, which the candidate would explain. On page 33 of the qualification handbook, you'll see further details of ingredients. And remember that although a student may have others in their assignments, don't penalise those of you who don't see any other evidence, because basically the ones that are listed in the handbook are the ones that we might expect to see. If candidates want to do more than that, that's entirely up to them, but don't compare those candidates with the candidates that only give you the list that's in the handbook. Because remember, if you haven't taught it, don't reduce marks if it's not actually there. Next question is, I have learners for 2 years from year 9. I was advised to put them in for the test, so that's the external exam, in their second year. So this year I'm mainly doing theory. Would you think that's okay? And I would say that that's perfectly logical, and yes, that's a good idea. I wouldn't want to put them in for the exam just yet, because I doubt that they will have the sufficient knowledge. This is supposed to be a summative assessment of them at the end of their teaching programme, rather than some of the ways that we've assessed in MVQs and VRQs, which is to assess almost on an ongoing basis. The technicals aren't made up like that. When tutors provide feedback on recall of knowledge, do they need to confirm the types of questions asked and the answers the student gave? So my answer to that is, if a candidate has been given verbal questions, I would guard against doing too much of this within their synoptic task, because it's not actually written into the synoptic that they must answer verbal questions. The candidate should be able to show you and tell you what they were doing without you having to ask. So I wouldn't worry about devising a set of verbal questions. If you do have to ask questions, though, it should be out of earshot of other candidates and not lead the candidate in any way. So just be careful that that you don't kind of scaffold candidates by asking specific things. Try to keep the questions as open as possible. And then when you do ask those questions, yes, they should be noted on the practical observation form along with the answers. The question here is, do you have an exemplar for the level 2 technical qualification on marking? So the exemplar marking material used in this webinar is the material for you to use for 3038 for your standardization. It shows a higher level candidate, one who has just popped into, is on the grade boundary of a distinction grade, certainly for last year when it was marked. But as I say, don't rely on 45 marks out of 60 being a distinction grade, because that might change this year. The exemplar marking material can be used to benchmark your decisions when marking live material, but remember, obviously, when you're marking your work this year, it will be on ancient Greece, so it's not going to look the same, but you can benchmark the type of standard to that, so hopefully it will be of use to you. But if those of you that were asking that question are also delivering hairdressing for Key Stage 5, so the post-16, there is currently no such material that's been developed for that. So, but watch this space. There was a question here about whether would you suggest that we complete practical observation forms for any practical a learner undertakes, not just for the synoptic assessment? And I would suggest that, yes, it was quite good practice to have a go at completing practical observation forms, because remember, you know, these forms are supposed to be really well written. They're supposed to show the moderator exactly the reasons why you have judged a candidate as being good or having a certain amount of marks. And so, you know, if a practical observation form doesn't assist the marker in assigning marks to the full set of tasks, then you need more practice using it. So you could iron out any mistakes beforehand, before we actually get to see it, by using it as a standardization activity as well. So I think, yes, it's a very good reason why you would want to use them throughout any sort of formative assessments. The next question is moderation recorded internally? And I think that question is referring to internal standardization. So if that is the case, then yes, internal standardization is recorded internally. The internal standardization activity is noted in the centre, and then the centre will complete the form. That is then uploaded onto the platform when we want to see all the centre evidence along with the candidate evidence. So you will see there is a standardisation declaration form that the centre will have to upload. Another question was, which similar to a previous one, which is about on nails. There doesn't seem to be any photos or tools or ingredients of the nail design. Should there be? And I would say the answer to that is yes. Ideally, there should be, but not all candidates will do all things. So, you know, they might be asked to do a particular thing, but might not feel that they're capable of doing it, or they might forget to do it. And so, obviously, that's going to be reflected in their mark. So, you know, this is where we start to see that some candidates are going to just be better performers than others. A little bit more about the consultation sheet, which I think I've answered. So I think that should be okay for in terms of the questions today. If there are any further questions, then I would suggest that you direct those to the Technicals and Moderation Support team. I'll give you their details in a moment. But we've got here, I mentioned internal standardization, and this is the slide coming out of the generic centre standardization webinar that you will hopefully have attended. But so it's really just as a reminder. So people that should take part in internal standardization should be all of these people stated down here below. So delivery staff, assessors, observers, etc. I would also add that if you have any people coming in from industry, so experts such as salon owners and those sorts of people, you should also ask them to take part in some of these activities that are listed up here as well. Obviously, before you even start delivering the qualification, never mind assessing it, you should be familiarising yourself with what's in the qualification handbook. So have a good look at the subjects that need to be delivered, because remember that those synoptic assignments and of course the external exam is going to be based on what's found in the qualification handbook. And as it says down here, referring to the talk content found in that handbook will guide your judgments when you do come to assess. So if you're expecting to see something in an assessment but you've not taught it or facilitated research in it, then you're not really having the right sort of expectation level of your candidates. So remember that that familiarising yourself with that qualification handbook is the most important part of both delivery and then finally assessment. A good way of looking at things in terms of how good or bad things are is to rank order candidates' work. I think you could actually discuss within your teams, for example, two pieces of work, which one's better than the next one, and almost putting them on steps of those that are good and those that are better. Using the marking grid to assess both practical and written pieces of work throughout the year. So as I said, formative or mock assessments are a really good way of getting to grips with what's on those the descriptors in the marking grid, and to be familiar with those as well. I think that's really important. Okay, so we'll just pop onto the resources and support that's available to you. These are links, so you should be able to get to the pages that we see, and that's the email address for the Technicals and Moderation Support team with their phone number there as well. And if you have a look at those TechBack pages, you'll see that all the documents that are there for you that you need to complete. If you go onto the normal City and Guilds website, you will also then put in your qualification number on the search bar, and then you will see that there are assessment materials. And in fact, what I'm going to do for you here is go to this year's qualification report, and I'll show you how you get to it. So if here we go. So I clicked on that link and it comes up with the 3038. And if we go into documents rather than information, we will see level 2, assessment materials. And then if we look at past paper 2017, we can go right to the bottom of that list and we can see that the qualification report is there. Now, have a look at that qualification report. It's a PDF. It's not that long, but it's a very interesting read. It details the data coming out of results last year, along with hints and tips on how to avoid some of the common pitfalls in delivery and assessment of the synoptic assignment, along with the 2 exams. I'm sure you'll find it very helpful. Drawing your attention specifically to pages 8 and 9, you'll see the grade boundaries for last year's synoptic, and this shows that 34% of candidates achieved a pass for their synoptic, and 42% achieved a merit, and 12% achieved a distinction, showing that you're obviously doing good things in the delivery of this qualification. So please keep up the good work. Okay, I'd like to thank you for your time and I hope that this has been helpful to you, and we'll get those questions and answers out to you in the very near future. Thanks very much.